Somber Teacup Chronicles presents Arcane Academia.
Another day, another horrifying monster. I wonder what it's going to be this time. Oh, this is a little peculiar. Think that all this trouble over something like this. Oh, hello students. Come and sit down. Thank you for coming in on time. I appreciate your urge to learn, but remember to exercise caution. You can talk amongst yourselves before today's class. Get to know your fellow peers a little bit. I know the last lecture was a little concerning, but this one's going to be a little bit stranger. After class, I will be passing out sign-up sheets for those who are concerned about the topics that we covered last time in class. TAR and the university have both agreed to provide Level 1 training in mental protection. Now, we will be covering something a little unexpected today. We will be talking about an object instead of one of the many monsters that was produced by the Rupture. This particular object is a new addition to TAR. It has traded many hands over the course of its time out in the world before arriving to our lab. Through one of our many connections, we were able to procure this certain object before it could make it to the black market. Now we can begin the lecture. I will now recite a personal recount of the events that transpired in the death of all of the previous owners and how it fell into our hands. The item in question is a small obsidian dagger with a silver handle and a black diamond in the hilt. The silver handle appears to be melted to the obsidian blade, with silver running down its sides, almost like silver streams in a sea of black. TAR has given this artifact the nickname Pele's Lost Guardian. Okay, now that we have that all the way, I will now recite the account. I cannot believe such a treasure has fallen into my lap. This dagger was made with such exquisite care and precision, especially beautiful, and the moment I touched it, I knew I could tell it was old. How old? I'm not sure, but I felt deep inside me that if I mishandled the dagger, it could crumble into dust. When I asked Emily where she got it, her face turned a bit pale. She rubbed the back of her neck. She did not look at me and said that she would see me in a week. She left. She walked out of my office and looked as though she was going to break into a sprint. I placed the dagger on a clean cloth for my friend Jessie to clean before putting it on display in our museum. Jessie was a very detail-focused person who loved to take her time when working on cleaning new additions. I am never disappointed with her work because the items she works on almost look brand new when she's done with them. When Jessie finally showed up, I showed her the dagger in the back rooms. She was excited when I told her about the new addition, but stopped dead in her tracks when she looked at the dagger. She furrowed her brows and looked a bit concerned. She approached the dagger carefully. I had never seen her like this when it comes to a new project for her to work on. She pulled out a set of thick leather gloves and touched the dagger gently. She avoided the blade part of the dagger completely. She told me that she could only work on the hilt of the blade. I was taken aback by this and asked her what she meant by that. Her eyes were cold and distant as she looked at the dagger. I was a little worried and left her to her work. She works better without any distractions around. Maybe if I had stayed, I would have not made the same mistake as the previous owner. I should have known that Jessie knew more about the dagger than she had let on. When I went to work the next morning, I saw that there was police cars out in front of the building. I rushed inside to see what had occurred. Many of the exhibits were damaged, and all of the wax figures had melted. As I approached the back room, I saw that the glass had warped and melted as well. I was terrified to see what was behind the door. The police wanted to escort me out of the building, and some people dressed in all black with the logo TAR stamped on the back were investigating the site. I was able to sneak a quick glance into the back rooms as the door was briefly opened. Inside, I saw a charred remains of a skeleton with the obsidian dagger plunged into their chest. Scorch marks circled the ground of the body. I overheard one of the people from TAR talking about spontaneous combustion and how some of the black rocks led from the room. The burning smell of the building was almost unbearable, and I had to step outside. My eyes were watering at this point, and I was barely able to find my way out of the building. When I left, I saw Mr. Hobbs, the director of the museum, talking with TAR. When he saw me, he walked away from the strange armored people dressed in black. They carried large guns with them. My first impression is that they must have worked with the police. I was very wrong. I just didn't know how wrong I was until later that night. Mr. Hobbs walked over to me and told me that there was a break-in and arson. Mr. Hobbs was a very trustworthy person, but I felt for some reason he was lying to me. What I saw in the room was beyond arson and break-in. I was convinced that the events were somehow related to the arrival of the dagger. When no one was looking, I made my way back into the building and looked at the security cameras. I closed and locked the door behind me. I was alone in the room looking at a wall of TVs. I pulled up the cameras in hope that they were all able to capture something. I sat there for an hour, inspecting every camera, hoping that something was caught. There was a crash at the front of the window of the museum, and I saw 3 men entering the building. They carried a small, strange box with them to the back room where Jessie worked. I thought about the skeleton in the back room and was worried that something had happened to her. I continued to watch and saw that the 3 men were knocking at the backroom door, but it did not open. They waited for a moment and then pulled out small daggers from under their cloaks. There was a small flash of orange and red under the door, just as they kicked it down. The men screamed suddenly, and then there was a burst of flames that shot out of the back rooms. 2 of the men ran screaming out of the room with their cloaks on fire. The floor and the door frame began to warp from the intense heat and catch fire as well. There was a dark shadow leaving the room, and then suddenly the recording went out. I sat there, stunned at what I just saw. There was so much I did not understand, and there was so much I didn't know. The skeleton in the back room was not Jessie, but she was also not alone in that room. I felt a bit relieved, but then I came to the realization that I had no idea where Jessie was. I heard a knocking on the door and turned off all the TVs before opening. I saw one of the men from TAR looking at me for a moment and then turned their attention to the TVs. They told me to leave in a demanding and forceful way. They practically shoved me out of the room. Mr. Hobbs was a bit concerned and angry that TAR was moving around the museum however they wanted without his authorization. He placed a hand on my shoulder and told me that I should go home and rest. He informed me that it will take some time for the museum to reopen again. Until then, he was going to close off certain sections until they were fixed. I nodded to him and walked to my car. I made one stop over to the skeleton on my way out. The members of TAR were examining the body and the dagger very closely. They did not approach it or take out the dagger. They were obviously terrified of the thing. To tell you the truth, so was I, but I knew that the handle was safe to hold. I walked over to the TAR members and told them that I needed to take the dagger and put it in a safe location to prevent it from being damaged. The members of TAR scoffed at me and said the dagger was not going anywhere. I needed to know more about the dagger and argued with them for a while and told them about Jessie and how she had not finished cleaning it and it was in a fragile state. I could not tell if they were getting tired of me or believed my bluff. They just allowed me to take the dagger. I touched it, and the handle felt cold in my hands. I hid the dagger under my shirt and in my belt to avoid any further questions from the men from Tar. I drove home and received a strange call from an unknown number. When I picked up, I heard Jessie. She was panicked and said that she was in my house. I drove to the house as quick as possible. Some guy cut me off and almost hit me. I angrily swore at him and turned into my driveway. I opened the door and saw Jessie was pacing in my living room. I should have questioned how she got into my house, but it didn't come to me at the time. I asked her what was going on, and she looked at me worried. She looked at my hip and walked over and lifted up my side of my shirt and pulled out the dagger from my belt. She immediately inspected the dagger and then looked at my hands. She looked worried when she saw a small cut on my hand. The strange thing is that the cut was not bleeding. She looked worried and placed the dagger on the table. She asked me if I was angry with anyone today and wished that they had vanished. I asked what she was talking about. She reached into her pocket to call someone. I heard a tired, rough voice coming from the phone. Then the man mumbled something I couldn't hear. Jessie looked at me frequently, and I sat in the living room and watched her pacing around in my house. There was a mumble from the phone, and then she looked at her phone and gasped. I stood up and walked over her, and I looked over her shoulder, and I saw what looked to be body cam footage from police. They were running into a house and kicked down the front door that was charred and black on the ground. The inside of the house was smoking. The firefighters were outside putting out the fire. The cops went inside, and then there was this figure. There was screaming, and then the footage cut out. The last thing that I saw was a 8-foot-tall figure made out of solid black stone. It was wearing a grass skirt that was charred in black. It turned to the cops, and we saw what looked like a mask. The mask was also charred and looked like a traditional tiki mask. The eyes were a deep orange. It turned, and the wallpaper burst into flames as veins of lava poured out of its body and dripped into the ground. The screaming was the most terrifying part. As the video cut out, Jessie handed me back the dagger, and I looked at her confused. She told me to tap the golem when it enters my house. She told me not to run, not to scream. She looked at her front door and then ran out the back. I watched her, terrified as she ran, and then felt the ground shake. I walked over to the front door. There in my front yard was what looked to be the lava golem from the footage. I walked over to the golem, and then I raised the dagger up to its chest. The dagger seemed to pull me to the golem. I couldn't explain it at the time, and I still can't. The golem opened its chest, and I could see a bright red stone with a crack. I pushed the dagger into its chest, and then the golem collapsed onto the ground. The rocks turned into dust and blew away. That is the end of the transcript that was given to us by Mrs. Stevens. That incident resulted in 8 civilian casualties and the final retrieval of the dagger. I will not share its disclosed location. In fact, our agent has informed me the dagger was willingly turned over to us after the events. We are thankful that our agent was there to help with the last user to prevent the fate of the others. The golem was declared nullified. Tar covered up the incident as arson to prevent any further investigation and pandemonium. Our agent believes Naga was responsible for the attempt of the theft of the dagger. If she had not used the dagger, it might have fallen into the wrong hands. Oh, it appears that is all the time we have today. Thank you all for coming to this lecture, and I hope that you are all taking care of yourselves. If you stumble across anything strange, please call me or one of our agents, and we will deploy people to help. Oh, and, sorry, I have a call. I need to take this. Huh? You have, another case file for me? Oh, yeah, sure. I'll, pick it up this afternoon. A lot of new cases coming in recently. Something must be going on. Something big.